What is Chronicles of a Perfect Storm?
It's a series of books in which I have gone over these issues in great detail, these and many other issues in great detail. The Perfect Storm is what I envision as where this crisis of the Hispanic world is going to lead not just the Hispanic world itself, not just America, but the Western world, and as a result, the entire world. So that's the perfect storm. So we got the crisis, we have the perfect storm, and the instrument that is delivering that crisis is what I've termed and explained the narco-revolution. So these series of books are a diagnosis. I diagnose the problem. I go in detail about the etiology, the origins, the history, what's led us to this point. I talk about a solution treatment program, and I go also in depth regarding prognosis. What's going to happen if we don't change, if we don't make the necessary changes, the changes that I deem necessary as I detail them and specify them throughout the volumes. What will become of Latin America, what will become of the United States, what will become of Europe. That's what it's all about in a nutshell.
You also have a new philosophy, or the
biopsychocultural philosophy. That is a new way of analyzing and understanding culture and issues that pertain to what it means to be human as well. We have to understand culture is an emergent property. I'm using terms from complex systems. It is something that emerges as a result of humans that interact. So humans interact, and the patterns that govern those interactions, patterns of thinking and conduct, way we behavior and feeling, etc. Those patterns give rise to culture. So we find culture wherever we have humans interacting in groups. We're going to find culture. So biopsychocultural philosophy is a new philosophical methodology, system, if you will, that looks at the human condition from a biological standpoint, including, of course, evolution. It looks at the human condition from a psychological standpoint, so the human mind and the interaction between the human mind and the brain, cognitive neuroscience, cognitive affective neuroscience, and different aspects of psychology, social psychology, clinical psychology, and then there's, of course, the cultural aspect. So questions that we've been asking ourselves since the beginning of that whole discipline that we know as philosophy need to be readdressed now that we have new evidence in terms of where human beings come from. Back when we believed, when people believed that, for example, human beings were created in the image of God, well, issues of morality were attached to that form or that origin. So we believe that humans were created by God, therefore morality was brought to us from God. Well, now that we understand that humans are the result of evolution, we have to ask ourselves, what does morality consist of? What is right and what is wrong? What is justice? What is freedom? There's a whole slew of philosophical topics, issues that appear, for example, in Plato's Republic, and have been constantly reappearing and being reevaluated throughout human history, but in particular Western intellectual tradition. I mentioned social philosophers, political philosophers during the Enlightenment. I mentioned how they were primarily French and English, etc., European, Northern European. Well, much of the answers that they provided us were based on the concept of an existence of God or natural rights. Well, all of that has to be thrown out, and we have to reevaluate all those questions again with new answers based on the new discoveries, the science of of evolution, biology, etc. And we have to redefine what it means to be human, and what it means to be human in society, what it means to have culture, and what is the purpose of culture.
Thank you. Now, you offer this biopsychocultural philosophy as a way to diagnose and treat cultures, but how can you prove that it works?
Well, first of all, I can prove that what we have doesn't work. Okay, first, if you find that someone's sick, first you have to establish that they're sick. Okay, so you establish you're sick, and you have to identify what is the cause of the sickness. Let's say they have smallpox, all right, or let's say they have any kind of illness that you can identify as having a bacteria as its origin. So you identify where you're sick, you identify, or you diagnose them, you identify the bacteria, then you just say, well, okay, so how do I get this person healthy again? Well, you have to kill the bacteria. That's where penicillin came in and other antibiotics, etc. So largely, given that it's something new, that's a very good question. Given that it's something new, how do I know it's going to work? Well, it's like saying you're choking. Okay, you're choking. Something is obstructing your respiratory channels. You're choking on something. Well, if I've never extracted, let's say, a marble from a child's throat, how do I know that that's going to save him? Well, simple. I know that he's choking. I know that he needs air I need to remove the obstruction. Even though I've never done it before, it's safe to say that, okay, given that he needs air to breathe and to survive, that by removing the obstruction, he's going to survive. Well, it's a very similar process. And by understanding the nature of the problem, and by understanding how the problem came about, okay, then we can go about fixing the problem by going back and applying some remedies to the very steps that brought the problem about in the first place.
Thank you. And I think we have any other questions, but I have the last question for
Okay,
this session.
so the last question, then we'll ask the panel if they have any further questions.
In our conclusion, why does the narco revolution have an interdependent relationship with Latin America and the future of the U.S. United States?
Well, all along, from the very outset, I opened the letter by saying that there's an issue that I consider of the utmost importance to the national security, which means the present, and the future of the country, future prosperity, stability, security, safety of the country. The narco revolution, what it is an extension into the United States of a phenomenon that's crime-oriented, antisocial at its core, and that it's like a virus that preys upon a healthy host and winds up killing it. So, if we understand the purpose of this narco-revolution, or what it does once it enters in it, and once it converts a society or a state into a narco state, and eventually what the ultimate outcome is, and we have plenty of good examples with El Salvador and Guatemala and Honduras. We have an example of what's happening in Mexico. I remind you that the Mexicans' own organization states that we're experiencing crime rates that are unprecedented since the Mexican Revolution. So all we have to do is just infer that, given the population of Hispanics in the United States and all those other statistics, okay, what's going to happen in the United States is something similar. And we have an historical precedent in American history. A century ago, we have what happened during Prohibition and the Volstead Act. The amount of corruption and violence and organized crime that emerged as a result of this Prohibition that kind of policy. It doesn't work, and we're seeing the effects of this. Now, the insidious, the really insidious problem is the way the narco-revolution has transformed Latin American and Hispanic culture in general. Transformed it in a way that it'll come to a point where we won't be able, it's going to be very difficult. It's going to take a lot of effort to change it back. Because once what is antisocial becomes the norm, it becomes not only permissible, but it becomes ideal. And that is a fundamental problem that we are facing. What is antisocial from the standpoint of a healthy society is the norm. And whatever is the norm in a culture, in a society, becomes considered the ideal. So, and we are, after all, the narco market par excellence. We are the principal reason, or our consumption as Americans of narcotics are the principal reason why this whole movement exists.
How can Obama himself or any organization be a part of the solution if the Hispanic problem lies in their culture?
Okay. Well, in Chronicles of a Perfect Storm, I go about this in detail. We have to understand, first of all, what is the purpose of culture? Now, people tend to forget that. That's a good philosophical question. What is the purpose of culture? And we have to understand what the purpose of culture. The purpose of culture, if we go back to prehistoric times, if we go back in terms of evolution, the purpose of culture was to transmit a series of information, a certain amount of information in terms of patterns of conduct, thinking, ways of thinking, and feeling, that would enhance a community's possibilities to survive. Culture, is about survival. That's what it's all about. We have forgotten that. We have forgotten that the purpose of culture is survival, not to serve itself. Culture must serve a greater master, and that master is survival. Okay? What's happening is we've placed culture as the master. And why do we do that? It has to do with religion. Originally, if we go back in time, why did we pray to various gods? So they do something for us. These various rituals, rain dances and whatever, were important. Why? For survival. Along the way, and I'm summarizing greatly, but along the way, one of the problems of religion is that it tends to put emphasis on the paranormal or the supernatural, I should say. What unifies people in terms of religion is not life, it's death. Death and myth. So when we look at, when I say religion, I'm speaking mainly in terms of the most popular religions in the world. I'm speaking in very general terms, but essentially we're looking at the past, a very distant past. It's beyond anyone's reach and validation. Okay? And in terms of what are we looking at religion in the future, we're not looking at prosperity here in the real world. We're looking at some form of prosperity after we die. After we die. When originally, if we go back in time, the rain dance is to make the crops grow here and now. If we go back in terms of shamanism, which was one of my first thesis, back when I was writing about studying shamanism and literature and culture, etc., in Latin America. Now, the purpose, what did the shaman do? The shaman was, or is, an individual that mediates between the sacred and the profane. The profane, that which is everyday life, and what is sacred. Remember I said 5-level okay, of culture. We have what's sacred, our relationship to what's sacred, how we organize ourselves in terms of what's sacred, that's religion. Then we have society, which involves commerce and these other things, but it still has religion as its, often as its core. And on top of that, we have politics and economics. Okay, so we have those levels. Now, what did the shaman do? The shaman mediated between the sacred and the profane, but not for mediation itself, for a purpose. The purpose of shamanism was something concrete, prosperity, here and now. As our societies became, we went from hunter and gatherer societies, and then we have the agricultural revolution and become more sedentary, and we have crops, and shamanism starts shifting and gives way to institutionalized religions, and okay, and so on and so forth. We start losing track of the purpose of religion is here and now, and it becomes the there and then after we die. And because it's so intertwined with culture, culture becomes self-serving. And we put more emphasis on preserving aspects of culture than our own lives, when originally the purpose of culture was survival. Now we're more about the survival of culture than of human beings. We need to get past that. We need to go back to first principles. And this is what biopsychocultural philosophy is all about. Going back to first principles. What is the purpose of culture? What is the purpose of various habits and patterns that I have in terms of relating with people, being a father, being a teacher, etc. Concept of what's sacred, our relationship to it, etc. What is the purpose of that? Ultimately, it has to be, or it should be, about our survival. We've lost that. Now we have people in certain cultures where they'll blow themselves up, which is completely unnatural. It's antithetical to nature. They'll blow themselves up to get a position in the afterlife. Okay, now that is perverse. Okay? We have a problem with that. And that's killing us. So what can someone like President Obama do? Well, actually, as a president, very little. Because a president is a politician, and a politician has to be liked. Okay? Now, I, as a scientist and a philosopher, I don't need to be liked. Okay? My job is to present truths. My job is to educate people, not to be liked. My job, and we can go back to Socrates. Okay, why did they kill Socrates? Ultimately, because he pissed people off. Now, I'm not giving anyone ideas. Okay? But okay, essentially, the job of a philosopher and of a scientist, the job of a scientist is to come up with truth that is empirically that can be validated empirically. The purpose of a philosopher is to ask questions that may not, either based on what's empirically valid, or that will lead eventually to new research. Okay? Science can't tell you how to live your life. It can't. That's not the purpose of science. But science can tell you, eat this, don't eat that. Science can tell you, molecular biology or genetics can tell you, well, why we've evolved in these particular types of organs and these particular types of habits, etc. The purpose of philosophy then is to go and ask the difficult questions. What is the meaning of life? Now that we know that life comes through evolution and that we die and that's it, comes philosophy and says, all right, well, now that science, thank you very much, science, you've given me this, now what do I do with this? How do we live? What does it mean to be human in that context? What does it mean to be human when we understand that we are just an extension of other primates, that we are, as Jared Diamond said, the third chimpanzee, that we share, I forget, 98.6% of our genes with chimp, et cetera, et cetera. What does it mean to be human now? We have to be willing, capable of asking ourselves very ancient questions, but now in a very new context. What can President Obama do with that? Officially, not a heck of a lot, I don't think, because of his constituency, Hispanics, etc. Unofficially, quite a bit. After all, he is the most powerful man on the planet. So, I'm not going to answer President Obama's questions for him. I'll just present my questions to him. Okay, quickly, we have 1 minute left. Any other question? All right, well, Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Lourdes. And we're done.